everyone loves an archaeological and an iconographic mystery. So I bring to you a mystery, one that has been reopened by a recent publication. I'm not sure where else it appears, but I accessed it in the online magazine Ancient Near East Today. Link down below, you can see the pictures a little bit better than I'll show them to you by holding them up to the screen. But basically the object in question is a little silver goblet. Here's a two-dimensional side view of it. If you go to the link below, you can actually see a 3D video rendering of it. This thing is tiny. It's like this big, 8 centimeters. Not a real goblet, unless you're drinking, little teeny drinks out of a little goblet like that. More like a symbolic object, and something that it was done in a very thin plate of silver in a shape something like this, like a little arc, so that when you bend it, it creates a little conical goblet. It was discovered in a tomb in what is today the West Bank near Ramallah in Palestine, Israel, and sometime in the Bronze Age, maybe something like 2200 BC, maybe a little bit later. The dating's a little bit unclear. But it's a grave, fairly elaborate by the standards of these things. Other grave goods were found there, pottery and vessels and things like that, and this little silver piece. The interesting thing about the scene here is that it's a scene that tells a story, and that's really my very favorite kind of ancient Near Eastern iconography. When you get in ancient Near Eastern art things like single images, just like a single character or a single tree or something like this, you're just left wondering, what is this, right? And if it's not labeled, which these things almost never are with some kind of text, we really have very little insight into the mind of the artist, of the author. So even if we want to start with an interpretation, which is something like, what did the ancient artist intend with this piece? What were they trying to say? We're really just lost most of the time. I mean, my very favorite piece of maybe what we could call narrative ancient Near Eastern art is this thing from the early 2nd millennium from the city of Mari. This is from a palace of Zimri Lim. And it's a palace scene in which I realize this is hard to see. I'll put a link down below. Maybe you can tell a little bit better on the line drawing. You can see here the king, Zimri Lim, the king of Mari, and he was a contemporary, by the way, of Hammurabi, so think that era. The king is receiving some kind of standard or communicating with a goddess. There's a tiered universe here where the gods and the king communicate, and then below there are these nice rivers. You can see these nice rivers kind of flowing from these pictures. Beautiful nature scenery. There's a dove flying across the top, some hybrid winged sphinx figures. And I say that this is narrative because it tells a story about a cosmos, about the way that the world works. It is upheld by deities. The righteousness of the king sparks this world into motion, into animated motion, and the gods support it all, and the rivers flow, and food comes to you, and everything just kind of works. Love those kind of scenes, and I love what they seem to show and what they seem to say about human and divine communication, about righteousness and ecology, themes like that. So, what about this article and what about this piece? There's been, by these 3 authors, Zanger, Sarlo, and Haas Dantes, if I'm pronouncing their names correctly, called Lifting the Sky, the Cosmic Program on the Ein Samia Goblet. That's what this thing is called, the Ein Samia Goblet. Here is a photo of it, not to scale, like I said, it's really small, but you can't see the whole thing in one shot because it's 3D. So we can look at this line drawing from the Israel Museum, which gives at least an approximation of it, although not a perfect one, so you can't really see the whole scene at once. But here it is. Let it focus there. I realize it's a bit of a low-tech YouTubing here. But what's happening on this scene? I mean, just basic things that any of us would be able to see is some kind of hybrid figure here, Janus face perhaps, with 2 faces going in either direction, and 2 bodies with animal bottoms, kind of like he's a centaur or something like that, okay? In ancient Near Eastern terminology, we might call this a cherub type figure or a sphinx or something like that, right? Animal body with some kind of human element. And then, very prominently, of course, we have these snakes. Look at that great snake standing there, looking him right in the face. He's holding some kind of palm frond. Some of this is reconstructed, some of it is broken. And then you can see this central figure here seems to be holding some kind of disc, and this is a big part of the reinterpretation, is this disc here. That flowered looking thing is probably a sun disk, so the sun. And notice here that the figure is sitting on something like that sun disk. And then we have another snake. Is this the same snake or is this a different snake? Is down at the bottom, and then the other side is broken. Okay, so have a good look. Let's talk about this. The original interpretation made by the archaeologist, the famous Yadin, Israeli archaeologist, controversial figure in some ways, suggested, maybe rather flippantly here, one obvious interpretation. If you see something from the Bronze Age and it's vaguely Mesopotamian and there are some snakes and some characters and maybe these characters are dominating the snakes and maybe this snake is down below and then the heavens are above, you've got a ready-made interpretation, namely that this is the Enuma Elish, the famous scene in the Babylonian creation epic in which Marduk fights Tiamat, Tiamat being a kind of big personification of the saltwater sea. She's a kind of a sea figure, sea serpent, let's say, in that imagination. And he defeats her, and the creation story goes violent. He basically fillets her body, cuts her in half, and half of her he sets up as the earth, and the other half as the sky. So you have this two-tiered cosmos, sky, earth, kind of arced elements, the split body of the goddess. And then this middle space, I guess, created or boundaried by her body is the habitable space of the earth where we live. So one could look at this then and say, that's what's happening here. Maybe this is a Marduk-like figure, okay, and I don't know what's happening here, but you got the snakes, and so there you go. However, they point out some problems with the Enuma Elish interpretation, and they give a paragraph. You can read it for yourself. Why not the Enuma Elish? I mean, they point out just the simple fact that this doesn't appear to be a combat scene. And on this point, I will say I agree with these authors in this new interpretation. I'm just not seeing clear combat here. I'm not seeing a weapon. I'm not sure what this is. Maybe there's some hint of a weapon here. Maybe it's something else. The authors are going to suggest something else. A little too much serenity in this photo. Also, if this is the combat from the Enuma Elish, which is so iconic, single combat, what's happening over here? What's this dude doing? Why is he sitting on the sun? Why is there a separate snake going on? They also point out something maybe a little more vague about the various literary recensions of the Enuma Elish, saying, well, this is too early for the recension of the epic, which contained the battle with Tiamat. I don't find that one as compelling. I mean, I think these motifs are very old, hard to know how old. And by the way, if you want to be a little bit more sophisticated when you talk about things like the Babylonian creation story and the Enuma Elish, here's a tip from a scholar, a humble tip, which is, we have what we have preserved, but we don't know about the official status of these things. We don't know how many versions of these stories existed. We don't know that what we today call the Enuma Elish, when on high, this story was the creation story of the ancient Near Eastern world. It likely was a popular type, but we have some preservation bias in that we have what we have, and so we kind of use what we have and talk about what we have, but there were probably lots of versions of something like this going on. So I'd be a little hesitant to just say, well, we know for sure this can't be the Enuma Elish because of the dating and things like that, okay? These kinds of combat stories with chaos elements seem very old and very pervasive. And certainly the Bible, which is much later than this goblet, has lots of these things in it too, and probably not traceable back to any single version of the story. Anyway, so that's the rejection of the Enuma Elish scene, and frankly, I do agree with it. I'm just looking at this thing, and the more I look at it, the more I am not seeing Enuma Elish. Okay, what is it then, though? Well, we could start to think about the setting in the grave. This is maybe an elite kind of setting, somebody with a little bit of money here, a special kind of burial. And why is this in a burial tomb, by the way? Maybe the authors suggest, and maybe a little bit more than maybe, I think they're pretty firm in their view, you can read it and judge for yourself. This is some kind of cosmological scene in which they say, and I'll just summarize in my own words, these are two separate scenes. This scene is a scene of creation that is undifferentiated. Maybe you could say pre-creation. Men and women haven't been differentiated yet. The sky and the sea and so on are all just kind of part of one mythological world. And over here, this is scene number 2. Here we have the figure holding up what they call a boat on which the gods will carry the sun on its daily circuit through the cosmos and around or across or above the earth or whatever. And down below, we have this separated from the powers of the sea, represented by the snake. On the other side, then, there'd be another figure carrying this other side of the boat. Where they lose me on this interpretation, though, is this idea that when they start comparing it to all kinds of like Egyptian and Hittite and Mesopotamian, and suddenly now we just have an entire world full of undifferentiated symbols in which everyone on Earth in the ancient world generally believed in this kind of boat, sun, snake symbolism. I don't love those kind of moves for historical reasons. It's very vague. It kind of drifts away into vagueness on that front. But I don't think it's a bad suggestion because of that fact. I'm just revealing my historical kind of personality here. Like, I don't love these sameness interpretations. Like, everyone had a myth about the boat and the sun and the snake and so on. Well, maybe not. Okay, like I don't know that that's totally true. They adduce some comparative iconography, which is certainly very interesting, and I'm very intrigued by it as someone who's interested in iconography. And I think it's definitely worth looking at. For example, they show these examples, which they say haven't been typically compared. You can see here the kind of maybe the boat-like shape, this little arc, and then carrying the sun, and you have a figure carrying it. There's some Egyptian iconography like this as well. I guess I walk away from this thinking, A, this is not the Enuma Elish, but B, this kind of thing that they're talking about maybe doesn't quite sound right either to me. So, okay, smarty pants, like what the heck is it then? Like, I don't know. It's some characters and some snakes, okay? We know that for sure. There's a lot of ambiguity here. I throw it open to you though, oh viewer. What do you think is being shown in this picture? At the very least, I do think the authors are correct in that we do see some very common basic things here. At bottom, at base in the world is the sea. It is the snake. It is the monster, okay? And then you have the sun. Where is the sun? Of course, the sun is always going to be above us, right? And so you have a tiered universe. And they end their article by saying something like, and I paraphrase, whatever else it shows, the goblet shows the intimate connection between the divine world and the cosmos, that deities, that divinities uphold the cosmos, uphold the sun, and kind of keep this whole thing running. And that, I think, is a clear enough point and accurate. And I think to that extent, what we see here is maybe even a purely mythological scene in which there are no humans at all. This would be a god, or probably a god, not a goddess, but a god. This is certainly not a human in the depiction. And we see something like the powers, celestial powers like the sun, and the powers down below, which is the snake.